Good afternoon, son. How are you doing?
I am doing okay.
I'm writing a script. It's a complete ripoff of The Hangover, but with an F1 take. It's the night before the big race, the inaugural F1 Las Vegas Grand Prix. Max, Charles, and Yuki all wake up. No memory of the night before. Completely hungover. All sporting brand new Ultraman tattoos. They've got to get to the race, and they can't. Events keep getting in their way. And of course, Joe will play the Mr. Chow character.
That's funny. So who do you think's the one missing?
Who was missing? That's a good one.
Probably Lando would be my guess. But...
Right, yeah. Lando is the guy missing. That's awesome. And if we can make like a Christian Horner's wife, get her involved and have like a little Spice Girls reunion. This is can't miss, Patrick.
Yeah.
This is can't miss stuff. All right, testing. Are you ready? Are you ready to go, son?
I am ready to go.
Hello, welcome to Hard Compound, an American take on Formula One. We finished watching 3 days of testing. It was not riveting, but it was very informative. Who's up, who's down, what the media is saying, what the drivers are saying, what the team principals are saying, and most importantly of all, what we are saying. Patrick, son, can I have your take on F1 2023 testing?
Yeah, my take is pretty much like every other testing is who the hell knows? I think testing is always interesting. It's kind of can be difficult to gain a ton of real insight into how the season will go. It's really our first opportunity to see the new cars on track. But it really is just testing. So you don't know exactly what teams are trying to look at or how they might adjust certain things or, if the drivers have a handle on their cars yet. But, this season's testing, I think, was interesting in a number of ways. One is that Red Bull look like they could continue their dominance throughout this season. They were just setting crazy pace in pretty much every testing session, well ahead of anybody else on track. And you don't really know if that is Red Bull's true pace or really anybody else's true pace. So we can only really tell that from the season. But what I did think was very cool is that we saw laps that were over a quarter of a second faster in these testing sessions than the pole lap set by Leclerc in Bahrain last year. So these cars are crazy fast. I fully expect them to be able to, stay just as close to each other as they were last season. So I think we're in for a very exciting, fun season of Formula One.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a great season. It's year 2 of these regulations, year 2, essentially, of the spending cap. I think all of this is going to make for a much closer grid, much tighter racing. I think there are legitimately 5 teams that can podium on any race and more that could podium, sort of on that rare instance where maybe an incident happens on track or it's extremely hot or raining, for example. I think this is going to be a great year. I love how, it appears after the first day of testing that most of the reliability issues have been worked out. So I think we're really going to see a lot of this season that's true driver skill, and also some of the innovations the teams have made with respect to things like aerodynamics, for example. And with the side pods, we now have sort of three teams leading the way with specific designs. Mercedes was sort of the innovative no pods. Red Bull has their look. Ferrari has theirs, which I think Haas obviously has followed. So I think it's going to be great. I think we're going to have one of the better seasons and more close racing than we've had in years. It also, I'm happy to say, it looks like Alonso, after all these years, finally has a car somewhat worthy of his talents, which we have not seen yet. Any surprises based on 3 days of testing?
That is a good question. I think it's always interesting to see how teams design their cars. And I think with the new regulations, it's very interesting because we're seeing, like you mentioned, teams designing in very different ways, especially those aero elements. There's this whole downforce versus drag that engineers have to take into account when they're designing these cars, and what the best ratio is, and how they can design these elements to achieve that critical balance. And so, like you said, we're seeing Mercedes continue with their sort of no side pods design, and Ferrari has this like crazy huge side pods design. So there's sort of a differing of opinion there, I guess, on the best way to design your car to get to sort of achieve that optimal downforce versus drag balance, which I think is super interesting to see here. And they've both teams have sort of maintained that sort of approach from last season. And, we're sort of just waiting to see whether that actually translates into a competitive car. For Ferrari, we saw last year at the beginning of the season when they had their power unit sort of turned up to full blast, they were very competitive. And so hopefully they can sort of achieve that again during the season. And Mercedes, obviously, they just sort of made their way through the season and got better every single week. And so, I think I kind of fully expect them to come out this season with real pace, and compete from the start with those top two teams. Yeah. Mercedes has a history of sandbagging, but by day 3, they were looking pretty good. For me, I think one of the biggest surprises, I think the biggest surprise of all was that the 41-year-old Fernando Alonso, I think, may have put in more laps than anyone, which how he does that, I don't know how that's possible. Obviously, he wants to do his very best, and he's always bringing his very best. But the Aston Martin legitimately looked significantly better than last year's car. I think maybe no other team looked more improved than Aston Martin. I have to say, I was a little surprised by just the sheer brazen cockiness of Christian Horner and the Red Bull team. Max is so understated. He's a nice guy. He always says, almost always has a nice word to say about everyone and about everything. But Christian Horner and the team were really strutting around. I think they believe their car is still better than anyone else's. And that was sort of plain to see from their expressions, if not necessarily from what the rest of us got to see on track. I'm especially also interested in that no side pods design. Mercedes stuck with it,
it appears that in total, that this design will work. Last year, they had so many issues that I think a lot of us were questioning if this was a long-term strategy, but it appears that it definitely will work for them. And so I just love that these new regulations are not making races tighter, allowing for more overtakes, allowing for more competition, but sort of encouraging these different aerodynamic designs on the cars. It was also fun seeing all the rookies and seeing Nico Hülkenberg back.
Yeah, it's always good to see drivers come back, and Hülkenberg actually looked pretty comfortable and looked like he will be able to compete with his teammate Kevin Magnussen this year, which I think will be fun in that Haas garage, especially if Haas can actually sort of compete with maybe Alfa Romeo and some of those other teams for the last few points in any given race. I think that'll be a fun competition to see. But all these rookies. Last year, we only really had one rookie throughout the season, and this year we'll have at least three. Plus, we might see Felipe Drugovich, step in for Lance Stroll if Stroll is still out injured. And it
seems like at this recording that seems likely.
Yeah.
So that we'll have Piastri, De Vries, Logan, the American, and then Drugovich as well. So that'll be pretty great for essentially four rookies on the grid at the same time. Although as much as I love seeing the young drivers, there is that sort of the bittersweet sense. Vettel's retired. Ricardo was sent packing. So really the veterans, the old guys, it's Alonso and Hamilton. And there's probably only, for as much as I'm amazed that Alonso can still be competing at age 41 and putting in the most laps, it's, there can only be maybe a couple more years. So that's bittersweet knowing those guys will be gone soon, especially Alonso, because as great as Vettel was and Hamilton is, Alonso was also in that sort of elite company. And what I liked most about him was he always tells it straight. Vettel and Hamilton, I think they love the public affirmation, and they're always somewhat, I don't want to say political, calculated in what they say. And they have a lot of causes they embrace. Alonso is just, he's there. He's all about the racing. And so we know exactly, what really is going on inside FIA, inside F1, if something is good or not, if the drivers want it or not. Hamilton and Vettel were always, they knew how to speak to the media. Alonso just tells it straight. So I'm also going to miss that.
Yeah. I mean, Alonso has always been fun and a joy to watch. And I think his nature is maybe used to be well suited to Formula One, but they don't really seem to love that too much anymore. I think Hamilton has been a great ambassador for the sport, and he seems like he's really trying to bring the sport to everybody, which as someone who really enjoys Formula One, I think that's good to see. But I think, something both of those guys have in common, and I never really gave Hamilton enough credit for it, is just how cutthroat they are. And I think that that aspect, not too many other drivers on the grid I think really have that in them. I think Max is really the only one that comes to mind that is just absolutely cutthroat. And that's definitely something that I will miss from both of those guys.
Yeah. I mean, we should still be able to watch them this season, probably next season, maybe even a third for Hamilton. But as much as it's fun to see the rookie drivers, that will be bittersweet. Anyone, and it doesn't have to be driver, that you think is on the hot seat following testing?
On the hot seat. Oh, that's interesting. Well, I think two teams in particular, well, maybe even three teams in particular that really, I don't know that they looked so great in testing. The one that comes to mind right away is McLaren. They completed by far the fewest laps of any team during testing, and were kind of slow throughout the whole thing. And, like I said before, pace during testing isn't necessarily real pace for the season. But I think it's worrying to see how few laps they completed during testing due to legitimate issues with the cars that kept them sort of working on the cars in the garage. And so, I think at least at McLaren, you have to look at like the top guys and team principals, even going to Zach Brown. I think he's done a lot of good for that team, but F1 in general is a results-driven sport, and if McLaren's not getting it done, then I think he's the first one to go.
Yeah, I have several on the hot seat, and I think a few that might surprise you, but the hottest, I think, deservedly so, should be Zach Brown, who's overseeing the McLaren team. He ditched Daniel Ricciardo, who everyone likes, because Ricciardo was making a lot of money but not getting the results. Zach has done a lot of great things since he came on board at McLaren, and all the sponsor money just shows you what a great job he's done on the marketing side. But they came in fifth last year. They did not look great, and they looked even worse in testing this year. And as you say, testing reveals much, but not everything. So we don't know what the final results for the season will be. But Zach Brown and the McLaren team, they are not looking good. He put Ricciardo on a short leash. He belongs on one. I also think, and this is not so much to do with testing, but Yuki should be on the hot seat. De Vries, the rookie, he's not a young rookie. He's older, but he is a rookie. Looks like he can hang with Yuki. And, this will be Yuki's third year. He has not really impressed. And I think more importantly, I have not really seen him step up his game. I have not seen much improvement from Yuki. And I think if that remains the same this season, AlphaTauri should be looking to replace him. Now, my big surprise in the hot seat, the Ferrari drivers. Ferrari has the glamour team. Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc. Everyone loves them. They're solid drivers. Ferrari had a great car last year, and a couple of blunders by Leclerc and numerous blunders by the Ferrari team cost them potential constructors and driver championship. They brought on board an experienced team principal. Their car looks good again this year. Certainly, I think it's shown it can compete, it can win. And I think if we go yet another year with Ferrari not winning constructors, Ferrari not winning a drivers' championship, And particularly if they don't even come in second, I think we have to consider replacing the Ferrari drivers.
I think that is fair. You have to look at the drivers always, especially if you've sort of replaced the boss, which Ferrari have in the off season. And they say they've improved reliability on that power unit. So we'll see how true that is. But yeah, I mean, if the drivers are still struggling to get it done, then you have to look at those guys. I mean, you're paying them upwards of like $10 million a year to drive for you. You got to get your money's worth.
Now, what do you think? Again, this is based on testing, but also based on the drivers, based on what we saw last year, and based on what we saw last year as far as team progression went. I want to get what you think will be the order of the teams in 2023. I'm happy to start first on this. And again, this is based on merely 3 days of testing, but also the driver lineups and what the team showed us last year. So, for example, Mercedes with their innovative design kind of fumbled at the beginning of the season, but no team, in my opinion, progressed more. I mean, they were fighting for podiums at the end and nearly was able to surpass Ferrari for second. So you have to assume Mercedes will continue to innovate better than just about any team throughout the season. Or innovate is probably the wrong word, but sort of improve. Haas was a team, for example, that did not improve very much last year. They started off well and then just sort of slowly, sort of, just sort of got less and less good, to be kind. So for me, I still think Red Bull is the team to beat. I think Red Bull will win. They have Max and they have a great car. I then think it won't be Ferrari, but Mercedes. 2 great drivers in George Russell and Lewis Hamilton. They continue to get better every week, it seems. And by day 3 of testing, that car looked good. I'm going to put Mercedes at number 2, then Ferrari. And I think despite the new regulations and despite the cost cap, that's still sort of working its way into the F1 system, the F1 nervous system. I still think we're going to have 3 dominant teams and everyone else sort of, a good bit behind. So my top 3, Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari. What do you have for your top 3, Patrick?
Ooh, that I think is totally reasonable. And I think that will be the top 3 teams. It's challenging to sort of think of an order to put these teams in. I think for me, Red Bull looks so good and so dominant with that car. I do not believe in Sergio Perez. I think Mercedes, because of that, Mercedes ends up with the Constructors title.
Wow.
I think Perez gets replaced by Ricciardo halfway through the season.
Oh, nice.
Maybe I should have put him on my hot seat too. But anyways, yeah, I'll say Mercedes would be my team to beat. Because Max is so good and Red Bull is proven that they have a competitive car every year. I think they will still beat out Ferrari and come second. And then Ferrari in third, probably not too distant. But I do think they end up in third.
Interesting. Yes, we have the same in the top three, but yeah, I've got Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari. That will be pretty interesting if Mercedes can get right back to the constructor with their innovative design, second year with George and alongside Lewis. My fourth, and this is based on testing and driver and their progression from last year, Aston Martin. They'll have Alonso, who I think is one of the best ever, but also Stroll, who I don't think is one of the best ever. But I think he's capable, he's experienced, and that's a good car. I then think, even though I think Aston will be a distant fourth, the mid-pack of 5, 6, 7 will be distant of Aston. And I have Alpine, Alfa Romeo, Haas, and shockingly down at 8th, McLaren. So Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, then Aston Martin, then Alpine, Alfa Romeo, Haas, and McLaren. Remember, Alfa Romeo, they looked fine in testing. They've got a veteran driver in Valtteri Bottas and that Ferrari engine, which looked good, and no rookie. Zhou looked quite capable last year, and he's back again. So I think that's going to help them. Haas looked fine in testing. They've got two good drivers in Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg. And McLaren, though, that I don't know. They looked lost last year. I think Ricciardo took most of the blame for that, but they look lost again in testing this year. So I have them 8th place.
That is so interesting. That's I would not have predicted that. But very interesting. I think I can't in good conscience say that I think Aston Martin will be 4th in the constructors. I think Alonso is great. I think the car in testing looked solid. I still don't necessarily believe in that team or in Lance Stroll. So I think in 4th, distant from the top 3, but I also think they will distance themselves from the rest. Alpine. I think they have two really solid drivers. Alpine always puts out a good car. Not great, but good. And I think with those two drivers, very solid, Gasly can make something incredible happen. They're one of the only teams down in this area that actually have race winners. I guess Bottas and Alonso both have wins, but Gasly and Ocon each both of them have wins under their belt. So
in middling cars.
Yeah. But yeah, I think Alpine definitely in 4th. Then, I think Aston will be a ways back from them, but I think they'll be better than any of the remaining teams here. So I'll say Aston in 5th. Then I think McLaren will be 6th, which will be very disappointing, but not so bad as 8th like you have. And then I'll say Alfa Romeo and Haas after that. Both of them looked acceptable in testing. I think Magnussen and Hülkenberg, that pair is an experienced pair of drivers, and they'll keep Haas in it for as long as they can. So I think,
yeah, interesting how we're going to have the same in the bottom because
they both looked horrible. So
AlphaTauri looked horrible. I have them 9th. Williams looked fine for Williams, but Williams hasn't looked great or even really good in at least a generation, it seems.
Yeah.
But it is sort of interesting how we have them in these groups. In my top 3, Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, you've got a top 3, Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari. Very similar. I have got kind of a distant 4th, but it's on its own. Aston, you have Alpine. We then sort of have, Alpha, Haas, McLaren kind of in another grouping just behind. And then at the very back, AlphaTauri and Williams. So I have Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, then Aston Martin, then Alpine, Alfa Romeo, Haas, and McLaren, then AlphaTauri and Williams. You have Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari, Alpine, then Aston, then McLaren, Alfa Romeo, and Haas. And who at 9th and 10th?
I'll say Williams digs themselves out of the bottom. They're 9th, AlphaTauri 10th.
Nice. I hope you're right. And I
think Yuki's gone like maybe 6 races into the season.
Wow. I would
on
like
the
to see that
block.
I would like to see that just for the drama of it. It's funny because for historic reasons, for a lot of reasons, I want Williams to perform well. I like Albon. They now have Logan Sargent, an actual American driver, but nothing from that car, that team has ever really looked good in, since I think George W. Bush was president, it seems like. So I am not looking forward to much. However, I do have a conspiracy theory because AlphaTauri, the Red Bull sister team, in my opinion, should not be as awful as they are.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's just Yuki. I think, here's my conspiracy theory, Patrick. I think that Red Bull are deliberately sabotaging this team. I think Red Bull, for all the amazing branding value they get from the Red Bull team, aren't getting that from the AlphaTauri team. And certainly in America, no one wears AlphaTauri or even knows what they are.
Mm-hmm.
They make clothes, by the way. None of which you'll want. And yet, we keep hearing about all these hopeful buyers, these rich people and their representatives like Andretti, the Andretti family, wanting to buy a team, get into F1, either buy up an existing team or be an additional team, an 11th team, a 12th team, for example. The value of F1 continues to skyrocket, and so the price of entry continues to skyrocket. And imagine how much Red Bull could make, how much cash they will get if the AlphaTauri team is sold. So they'll get the money from the sale of that team plus the same amount of cash that all the teams will get because there's a new buyer coming in and they have to pay an entry fee in a sense. So that's my conspiracy theory that Red Bull is deliberately sabotaging AlphaTauri because they want to sell the team and they can make a fortune off of it.
I believe that's valid. I think that team over the last few seasons has been surprisingly bad. We used to see drivers come up through that team and then make their way into the Red Bull team. But now the drivers that are coming through that team seem not capable of really even being in F1. Maybe DeVries changes that, but that used to be sort of the proving ground for Red Bull. And now it doesn't seem like that. In fact, they don't even want another person in that second seat aside next to Max. So I see no reason for them to even really care about that team at all.
Yeah. Now, you have had a couple shocking theories. One that Ricciardo waiting in the wings to replace Perez mid-season at Red Bull. I can believe that. Who might replace Yuki if he gets the axe mid-season? Do you have? Is there
Mick.
anyone around? Oh, Mick. That would be. Oh, they would. Yeah. Everybody loves Mick. That would work.
Who wouldn't love a Schumacher?
Right. He seems like such a good guy. Schumacher name, and he's a good guy. And I think it was always unfair. I don't want to say unfair, but he got booted from Haas. That's a tough team to be in.
I think he took the fall for Gunther.
He took the fall for Gunther. You're right. And he's still a young guy. I think because Max has been so dominant and has been winning from such a crazy young age that sort of we allowed that to sort of alter our perception of what should happen. Mick in America would be carded. He's such a young guy, so I think he definitely can be back in F1. Any other interesting battles? Like, for example, so far it's all been nice between Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg.
Well, that's not going to last.
I agree. That's not going to last. It's like Piastri. I like Piastri because he seems so talented and is an absolute dick. Well, his teammate, Lando Norris, is so talented and is an absolute dick. How is that going to play out? There's going to be some fun battles and drama this season. Which are the ones that you're looking most forward to?
I think for sure Hülkenberg and Magnussen is going to be spicy. I actually think Max and Perez is going to be really crazy because, well, Max is way better than Sergio is. He's the obvious number one at Red Bull, the golden boy. And Perez wants to keep his seat. But I think that will end up getting him in trouble. But I think that'll be fun to watch for sure.
Yeah, that's going to be a good one. Christian Horner would never admit it, but he completely embraced the total wolf strategy. Yeah. Have the clear dominant number one, Lewis Hamilton, and then someone who's not going to wreck the car, which was Valtteri Bottas. And that's what Perez is doing. But Mercedes could do that when they had a clearly dominant car. Red Bull, I think, is the fastest, but there are other teams that could win. So I'm not sure this strategy will work for Red Bull the way it did for Toto Wolff and Mercedes.
Yeah. And I think also Perez is, I just don't think he would take as kindly to being that guy as Bottas did. But that remains to be seen. I think the other interesting teammate matchup will be Albon and Logan Sargent way down at Williams. That seems like it'll be, again, a middling car. But I'm worried for Albon. He's down at Williams. He got booted from Red Bull, maybe unfairly, but that really doesn't matter at this point. And if, he starts getting beat by his rookie teammate, that's going to be really tough for him to stay in Formula One. So I think that'll be a battle to watch as well.
Who do you think will do best of the rookies? Because in testing, Logan Sargent looked quite good, I thought. DeVry, again, the cars were the star of the show, and they really sort of dominate what does and what can happen. DeVry did not look great with AlphaTauri. Piastri looked fine, but the McLaren was god awful. And standing in for Lance Stroll was Drugovich, who looked really good. So any thoughts on who you think will do best out of the rookies?
That's a good question. I think
they are all good questions, son.
They are. Well, of course. Probably De Vries, I think I'll say, will be my rookie of the year. But I also think he has probably the least pressure on him of anybody. So,
yeah, I tend to agree with that. Everyone, seems to have raved about how much talent Oscar Piastri has, but there's a ton of pressure on him. He booted out the much-loved Daniel Ricciardo, who replaces him. He sort of screwed over Alpine, which had really nurtured his career. And McLaren does not look great. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on him. Lando will not be his friend. And so that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I agree with you. De Vries, he's one of the older rookies out there. I think he's 26, maybe 27. He's got a ton of experience. He was driving in F2, Formula E, reserve driver for a long time. There's really no pressure there on AlphaTauri. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think De Vries will be rookie of the year. And I'm most interested, though, in seeing what the American Logan Sargent can do. What do you think will be the World Driver Championship standings? Are you ready to predict at least maybe your top 5?
Sure.
Again, this is based on testing, which is sort of ridiculous to sort of base WDC on testing, but we have seen these drivers, most of them in the top teams for years now. We've seen what the cars did last year. We've seen what they've done on testing this year. And it's a podcast, so we're fully allowed. This is fully within our rights to predict WDC F1 2023, Patrick.
Yeah, I am going to predict exactly what the World Driver Championships standings will be in 2023. So I think there's only 2 drivers that I have to pick from for number 1 spot. And I am going to pick Lewis Hamilton as my World Driver Championship.
So you have Lewis getting his 8th, a record-breaking 8th, and Mercedes winning the Constructor as well.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. And number 2.
Max. He's so good.
Okay, Max.
But
he's so good.
I believe Mercedes will figure out how to cover him off just enough in order to get Lewis his 8th.
All right. Now let's go 3, 4, 5. What do you have for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Patrick?
3, 4, 5. Let's see. I have Leclerc in 3, George in 4, and Alonso in 5.
Wow. That would be great to see Alonso in 5. So you have Lewis Hamilton winning the 2023 World Driver Championship, followed by Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, George Russell, and Fernando Alonso. Amazing. If Alonso wins, there's got to be some record between first win and last win, for example, that he would have hold. You know, he's been around for 20 odd years. So mine then will surprise you. I have Max three-peating, win 21, 22, and I have him winning again in 23. He's just, I think, right now, the best driver on the grid, I think, by far. And in that Red Bull car, which I think is very good, at least a top 3 car, that means Max Verstappen three-peats. Number 2, George Russell. I know. I think he outraces Lewis Hamilton, and I think he takes full advantage of that Mercedes car and capitalizes on repeat Ferrari blunders once again and takes second. Third, you won't like it, Sergio Perez. I think the Red Bull will prove itself the second year in a row as being the dominant car. And Sergio's a capable, experienced driver. I think he'll take it into third spot. My fourth, the Ferrari car has the pace. It was great last year. I think it's going to be great again this year. Carlos Sainz.
Ooh,
Charles, in my opinion, falters under pressure. A lot of Ferrari car and team mistakes cover that up, but I believe Charles falters a bit under pressure. And Sainz now back with the team. I have him 4th. And in 5th, Lewis Hamilton. So Max, George Russell, Sergio Perez, Carlos Sainz, and Lewis Hamilton. 3 teams, whereas you have Lewis from Mercedes, Max from Red Bull, Charles Ferrari, George Mercedes, and Alonso with Aston. Interesting. Okay. Any crazy predictions? Because I have several, and this will be fun. Any crazy predictions for this season, Patrick?
Other than the ones I've already said.
Any other crazy predictions beyond Ricciardo replacing Perez mid-season, beyond Yuki getting the boot mid-season? That could be it. Yuki, maybe he just gets like fat. He just keeps eating all that Italian food. He gets fat. He can't get in, he can't get into the car. Maybe they send him off to NASCAR. There's plenty of room in those big American NASCAR cars.
I don't know if they'll be able to reach the pedals.
Ouch. Ouch.
Let's see.
Any other crazy predictions?
Maybe a couple. I think there will be only 4 different race winners this season. And I think those 4 will be Hamilton, Max, Charles, and Fernando Alonso. The only 4 race winners this season.
Wow, that's interesting. That is a crazy one. Now, your other crazy ones, obviously, Yuki gets the boot during the season. Perez gets the boot during the season. I love those. I hope those happen just for the drama. My crazy prediction is that we discover that Red Bull really is sabotaging AlphaTauri to sell the team. But I have some other ones. Even though I think Mercedes will take number 2 in the Constructors, I predict Aston Martin will have as many wins as Mercedes because Alonso has a somewhat capable car. I've been hammering away at my idea for a F1 Champions Tour, similar to the Golf Champions Tour or Senior Tour, where we have great legendary drivers from F1 and even Indy doing races, a special F1 Champions Tour. This week, we heard Lance Stroll might not be able to drive the opening race for Aston. And everyone was saying, please, you already have Fernando Alonso. Let's make it Seb Vettel jumping in, who drove for Aston last year. That won't happen, but there's just so much fan interest in these veteran drivers that I think 23 is when they officially announce the F1 Champions Tour or Senior Tour, Patrick. My other crazy prediction. So, as bad as McLaren has done on track, Zach Brown is really just raking in the marketing dollars. McLaren has this cool thing on the side where it's not just an ad that's like a decal, it's a digital ad. So it can change during the race even. It could be an advertisement for Amazon or Google or anything. Chipotle, which is a Haas sponsor. I think they should open that technology up. So let fans just sort of in real time, hey, put my name there. Lando's winning or Oscar Piastri is winning. It's going to cost me $1,000 to have my name flash up on the screen, on the McLaren vehicle. We all can see it. Any company can do it. I love this idea of just sort of opening things up to the fans during the race. So any company can buy that little sponsorship slot there from McLaren because it's digital and you can do it immediately. Just sort of real-time pricing. If Lando looks like he's going to win a race or podium, the price for that ad goes up. If it's raining and Lando's in the back of the grid or Piastri, the price goes down. Anyone can buy it. And I think we are going to see, because F1 has embraced social media, that's going to be the start of sort of a whole new thinking of fan involvement in races. Not just sort of fans producing content, but ways fans can interact with the race as it's happening. Those are my crazy predictions, Patrick. Anything else?
No, I think those are really interesting. I think that the Las Vegas Grand Prix, first one ever, inaugural Las Vegas Grand Prix, I guess, for F1 will be by far the most watched sporting event of 2023 worldwide.
Wow. That's a good one. And yeah, I mean, they have had F1 in Vegas before, but it was, before most people were alive.
Yeah.
All right. I want to thank you all for listening to everybody's most beloved father and son F1 podcast. And we are, I have one more thing to say. Otmar Szafnauer. He is the team principal at Alpine, and he, like me, is a fellow Detroiter. I am inviting him on the podcast. I would like to have a brief interview with Otmar. Otmar, if you're listening, hit me up, 313. We need to stand together. All right. That's it. We are lights out.
See ya. Thanks for listening.
Okay, that was a fun show, son. I think we had some good crazy predictions. I was watching the first few episodes of Drive to Survive, new season 5.
Mm-hmm.
And the company that does that also produces a similar show for golf. But with golf, they have a villain because the PGA Tour is now under threat by this Saudi-backed LIV Tour that's spending a ton of money to sort of pick off top golfers and popular golfers. And I was thinking that's the problem with Drive to Survive. F1 needs a villain and does not have a villain. And so I was trying to come up with a villain. And now this is just between you and me. And it can't be Max because he's too nice. Lewis is too diplomatic. Alonso's just such a good driver. He only cares about racing. That doesn't make for a good villain. it has to be George Russell. George Russell, he already looks like a Bond villain.
He absolutely
He always
does.
has the elbows out. He absolutely does. He always has the elbows out. He's willing to take anyone out. He's, in my opinion, going to screw over Lewis Hamilton and prevent Lewis from ever winning an 8th world championship. We have to make George Russell the public face of villainy in F1.
Well, as